Hello, I'm Annie Graham Larkin, Executive Director of the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum. Welcome to Lake Superior Copper Kings, the story of the Calumet Arizona Mining Company with Mike Anderson. Thank you to our members and donors who enable the museum to provide free online programming and fulfill the organization's mission to discover history, explore Bisbee's past today. To learn how you can assist the museum in supporting its mission and programs by becoming a member or donor, please visit bisbeemuseum.org. On Saturday, September 19th, the museum will host the free online program, The Mines and Minerals of the Clifton-Morenci Mining District, Greenlee County, Arizona, with Arizona State Mine Inspector Les Presmick. To register or for more information, visit the events section of the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum's website or Facebook page. All right, now I'd like to introduce our speaker. Longtime Bisbee resident Mike Anderson is the author of Warren Ballpark, a work that delves into the rich history of the playing field. He is also the historian and founding member of the Friends of the Warren Ballpark in Bisbee. In addition to Warren Ballpark, Anderson's historical research has been featured in numerous journals and articles. And if you would like to ask questions during the program today, please type your question in the Q&A chat box, and we'll gather those questions to share with Mike after the program. Also, a link to the program recording will be sent to all of our Zoom registrants later today. And with that, I'd like to welcome Mr. Mike Anderson. Thanks for being with us once again.
Thank you very much for having me on today, Annie, and thanks to everybody who's out there watching this right now. I wish we had the ability right now to ask for a show of hands. It's pretty hard to do on Zoom. But if I could, I would like to just ask everybody to, if you know what the major mining company was that operated in Bisbee for the last 140 years, raise your hand. Okay, you're absolutely right. It was the Phelps Dodge Mining Company, which operated here from the early 1880s until 2007, when it was absorbed by Freeport-McMoRan. What a lot of folks don't know, including people who worked here all their lives for Phelps Dodge, was that there were other companies involved in producing copper in Bisbee, Arizona, and developing smelters in Douglas, and also operating in other places in Arizona and the Southwest. And today we're going to take a look at one of those companies that had a very, very big impact on Bisbee and other places in southwestern United States, including Arizona and New Mexico. So this is a Calumet and Arizona Mining Company that had its headquarters in Calumet, Michigan, and its operational headquarters in Warren, Arizona. So let's delve into the history of this company, which if you're not familiar with it, I think you'll be surprised at how much of an impact it did have on developing the mining industry in Bisbee and other places around Arizona and New Mexico, and also in developing the infrastructure of this community. Before we start doing that, though, we need to get an idea as far as where the mining company Calumet in Arizona came from. And the very first big mineral strike in the United States before James Marshall found the gold in the California streams and started the gold rush in 1849 was in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. If you're not familiar with where the UP is, it's the part of Michigan that's not connected to the mitten. It's above, separated by Lake Michigan and surrounded by Lake Superior. And in the early 1840s, it was a pretty undeveloped, heavily forested area, but prospectors and explorers going into that area found large amounts of native copper and very, very high quality copper ore. So in the early 1840s, copper mining got underway in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, specifically in the very top part, the peninsula on top of the Upper Peninsula called the Keweenaw Peninsula. And right, what you see right here is a photo of the Tamarack Shaft, which was part of the Calumet and Hecla Mining Company. And on the right is a ore ship that is loading up copper ingots to take across Lake Superior to various and sundry locations in the United States for refining and then turning into commercial copper. So very early on, copper mining was intensive in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and this was the first place that the copper industry really developed in the United States. And this is the best photo or best map I could possibly find of the Keweenaw. This is the shark fin on top of the Upper Peninsula. Sorry for all the advertisements. I did get legal permission from the owners of this map. They said, we don't care if you show this, and if anybody wants to use any of these companies, that's fine and dandy. But this is the Keweenaw right here. It's a long, narrow strip of land that is surrounded on all sides by an inlet of Lake Superior over here and Lake Superior itself out to the north. This is a huge inland sea that all it lacks from being a legitimate sea is salt and sharks. And in this part, which is divided by the Portage, this the river right here, and Portage Lake, this northern part was incredibly rich in copper. And deposits were found all around here. Calumet is located here, it's a suburb of Laurium, and down here is Houghton, Michigan, and Hancock, Michigan. This is all what's called Michigan's copper country. In 1871, two companies, the Calumet Company and the Hecla Mining Company, merged and became the Calumet and Hecla, and they became the dominant copper company in the Upper Peninsula. And this is a shaft. And what's interesting, you'll notice that this is a head frame located inside a covered structure in all these buildings. And you see the same thing here. The head frames are inside covered structures. There's a good reason for that because this is northern Michigan. And during the winter, temperatures are such extreme lows that unless you have your equipment and machinery covered and heated, your operations are going to come to a quick halt. In a huge metropolis developed in the Upper Peninsula, Michigan, in the Calumet and Hancock and Houghton areas. So these were very, very similar in terms of architecture to Bisbee, very similar to in terms of the extent of the mining operations, head frames, shops, smelters, and everything else. If you went up there right now, you'd be amazed at how similar it is to what you would find in Bisbee, except for the covered structures, of course, in the vast inland sea. And the terrain's a little different, but the mining operations are very similar. And there you get on the right a vivid example of why people from northern Michigan come to Arizona in the wintertime. So from 1840 through the 1890s, there were large amounts of money being made in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and investors that had made that money and also made investments and profits in the iron mining that was going on in Wisconsin and Minnesota began casting their eyes around to see what kind of investments they could make in other places to increase their wealth. And a number of miners from the Upper Peninsula had come out to Bisbee. One of them was John Graham. He'd worked out here, and he was very familiar with the potential wealth of the mines in Bisbee. Phelps Dodge had been operating since the 1880s and had amassed a considerable operation, and its owners had made a great deal of money. And Bisbee was turning into its own booming metropolis. He went back to Michigan and told folks out there there's incredible possibility for investors if we wanted to look at putting money into mines in the Bisbee area of the Warren Mining District. And at that time, moneyed interests in the Upper Peninsula sent out a fellow named James Hoatzin. And James Hoatzin was a very experienced mine captain, as they were called in the Upper Peninsula, a superintendent of one of the Calumet and Hecla mines. He'd worked extensively in the UP, in the Keweenaw Peninsula, copper country, and he'd also worked up in Butte, Montana, and Nevada and Idaho. So this man knew mines, knew copper mining, and was also looking for a way to invest the money that he'd made. He came out west and to Bisbee and looked at a property that there had been rumors about all over the West, the Irish Mag um, mining group, which was south of the main mines in Bisbee at that time, which were close to Old Bisbee. So the Irish Mag um, properties were about a mile and a half south of where most of the mining was going on that was being done by Phelps Dodge. And this mine was under legal contention because its original owner, James Daly, had fled the city after killing a constable, had sold off pieces of his mine to various and sundry interests in order to be able to finance his flight and continue his existence as a fugitive. So its status was very, very murky, but it had great potential. So these investors in the Upper Peninsula were looking very, very intently at this mining property, realizing that until its legal status was clarified, that there was no way to purchase it, but they had their eyes cast in that direction. And James Hoatzen, if you're familiar with Bisbee, was one of the two people that Hoatzen Avenue, where Judy and I live, my wife in Warren, is named after. The Irish Mag, by the way, is named after a prostitute in the Brewery Gulch Red Light District. So, in addition to the Calumet investors in Duluth, Minnesota, a very, very prosperous, booming city, and that's Duluth over there on the left. On the right is the port of Duluth. And in the early 1900s, believe it or not, the port of Duluth, Minnesota was the second busiest, most active port in the United States after the port of New York. It was a vast inland port at the very west end of Lake Superior, and it was a shipping point for timber, iron ore, and copper ore. So this city was very wealthy and had a lot of wealthy investors. If you go to Duluth today and look at the housing stock, it's pretty obvious that there was a great deal of money in Duluth in the early 20th century. And these investors were looking for places to put their money as well. So they cast in their fortune with the Calumet investors and looked very, very hard at let's invest in the Irish Mag if it becomes available. And Pittsburgh investors also looked with great interest at the Bisbee mines. And on the right, or excuse me, on the left is Henry W. Oliver. And Mr. Oliver was a Pittsburgh iron and steel manufacturer. The Oliver Mining Company, Oliver Iron Mining Company, in 1901 became a major component of U.S. Steel when it was formed. And Henry Oliver, by the early 20th century, was a very wealthy man. So he decided to also invest in Bisbee mines if the Irish Mag became available. On the right is George Tenner, brother of John Tenner, governor of Pennsylvania, and also heavily involved with iron mining and shipping of iron across Lake Superior. So both of these men had a great deal of money and decided if this thing turns out to be accessible, if we can get the green light to purchase the Irish Mag, we're in on it. Thomas Cole also became a major player. And Thomas Cole was born in Keweenaw, started work in the copper mines of the Upper Peninsula at age 8 after his dad was killed in a mine accident. And he worked his way up through the ranks in copper mining and then went over to iron mining and became the general superintendent of the Oliver Iron and Mining Company, working for Henry Oliver, and made his fortune in the Iron Range. On the right is his business partner, John Ryan, who worked his way up also in the Upper Peninsula and the Duluth area, becoming very active in iron mining. And then he went out west and worked his way up in Butte, Montana to developing controlling interests in all three of the major mining companies in Butte. So these two became major players in both Montana and later on in the Southwest. They were involved in acquiring the Cananea Consolidated Mining Company in the early years of the 20th century, 1906. So they're very wealthy players. And just to also let you know, Oliver Circle is named after Henry Oliver, and Tenner Avenue, where City Hall is located, is named after George Tenner. And of course, Cole Avenue is named after Thomas Cole. John Ryan just got the Cole Ryan building, which is also the McPherson building on the corner of Cole or Congdon and Arizona Street, named after him. So these are very wealthy people, high flyers, powerful investors. So the Irish Mag became available after a fellow named Martin Costello could prove that he had all the controlling interests. And that's Martin Costello on the left there. He was a Tombstone businessman and saloon owner, and he became the sole owner of the Irish Mag mine. Once the word got out that looks like the title is clear and there's somebody that wants to sell it to investors, the fellow on the right, Gordon Rennie Campbell, who was the general counsel and secretary for the investors in Calumet, came out to Arizona, made sure that the title was clear, gave his thumbs up to the investors in Calumet, Pittsburgh, and Duluth, and said, "Let's do it." And at that time, a new development company was formed in Calumet. And it was called the Lake Superior and Western Development Company. They purchased the Irish Mag for $500,000 and managed to do it quietly so that they finessed it away from Phelps Dodge, which was pretty surprising. But this company, these guys were smart, capable, and they're going to do it again. This mine, the Irish Mag, turned out to be extremely rich, and it was located again about a mile and a half south of where the mines were developing around and had been developed around Old Bisbee. The president of this new development company was Charles Briggs, and Briggs Avenue in Warren is named after him. Briggs Mine was named after him, and the Briggs suburb of Bisbee is also named after him. He was a wealthy Calumet businessman. He was the president of the Merchants and Miners Bank in Calumet. So we're talking about somebody that's an astute businessman who had a lot of money and got on board with this. And so now you have a development company formed in Calumet that is going to be developing this mine. And when it's developed, it's going to be turned over to another company that's going to operate the mine called the Calumet and Arizona Mining Company, named after its general offices located in Calumet, Michigan, and of course, Arizona. Capitalized with $2,500,000 from all those investors in Duluth, Calumet, and Pittsburgh. They started selling stock immediately. And as it turned out, once the word was out that these guys who knew what they were talking about when it comes to mining and business were involved in rich copper mines in Bisbee, it wasn't a problem at all to make sure that every share of stock was sold. The original stock was $10 per share, and in just about 5 years, that stock was worth $150 a share. Cha-ching. And that's so the CNA was born out of the Lake Superior and Western Development Company in March 1901. Now, John Graham had been appointed as the first superintendent for the Lake Superior and Western Development Company, and he was replaced in 1900 by a fellow named Isaac Lincoln Merrill, who'd had extensive experience operating mines all over the West. And Merrill had two jobs. One was to develop the Irish Mag, find other properties in the Warren Mining District, and also develop a smelter. So in 1901, construction began on a smelter down in Douglas. In November 1902, that smelter was blown in. Phelps Dodge was also constructing a smelter to replace the one that they had up in Bisbee. But the first smelter to operate in Douglas was the Calumet and Arizona Mining Company smelter. You can see its location, even though the buildings are gone. This was the last smelter to exist in Douglas. You can see the location of it as you're driving into Douglas. Look on the right, and you'll see a Calumet Road street sign before you get to Highway 191, and that was the location of the smelter. And as per his instructions, the CNA and its development company started purchasing properties all around Bisbee. One property that they purchased and developed was around South Bisbee, and it was operated by the Lake Superior and Pittsburgh Development Company, and it was the coal shaft. The coal shaft you can see today, it's on the left side of where South Bisbee used to exist, and that's it right there. And this is obviously an early picture because it's got steam operated hoist there. And this is South Bisbee. That's the coal shaft right there. And it's gone now. The coal shaft is there, but South Bisbee isn't. And this turned out to be an extremely productive mine, named after Thomas F. Cole. And the next acquisition that the CNA made was the Junction properties, again, near Lowell. And this was done with the help of another Bisbee miner and businessman named Lemuel Shattuck, who kept a close eye for the CNA on the properties in that area and realized that this was also available and had great promise. So in 1903, the CNA, again, under the nose of Phelps Dodge, snapped up this property, and it became one of the most productive mines in the Warren Mining District. And if you look out the door of the Bisbee Breakfast Club, and you see a big head frame there, and this is it over here, that's the Junction shaft. There it is right there. Again, this is obviously being operated with steam, not yet using electricity. And for a long, long time, all of the water that was in the water table that could potentially flood the mines operating in Bisbee was pumped out of the Junction shaft using very powerful water pumps. And then in 1903, Mr. Parnell, Sam Parnell, came in to replace Isaac Merrill. And this is Sam Parnell over here on the right. This is the first graduating class of the Michigan School of Mines, which operated in Houghton, Michigan. And this is their first building. It's still operating today as Michigan Tech. And he came in to, again, operate the existing mines and help develop other mines in the area, acquire properties and get them into development properties or companies, and then develop the mines. So Sam Parnell takes over in 1903. And by this time, all of these mines that the CNA had produced and developed were making lots and lots of money for these investors. The Calumet, Arizona had a reputation for being a profitable company that was also very generous to its investors. So not only did the shares of stock dramatically go up in value, but also the company offered extremely large quarterly dividends. And we're talking, if I said $6.50 or $6.50 a share quarterly, you'd think that's not a lot of money. But this is 1903, 1904, 1905, 1906. It's a lot of money. And if you own several hundred shares or 1,000 shares of CNA stock, then you're making a lot of money. And this is also before federal income taxes. So these guys are making money like bandits. This is Thomas Hoatzin. He's the brother of James Hoatzin, the fellow that first came out and looked over the property, the Irish Mag, and said, yeah, we want this. And he was also a very experienced mine captain, Captain Hoatzin, James, and Tom. And he made a ton of money. Both he and his brother were on the board of directors. James Hoatzin was the vice president of the CNA. Thomas Hoatzin was also not only a major shareholder, but a board of directors member. And in the early days of the CNA, after he'd made enough money, he decided he wanted to build a surprise present for his wife. in the suburb of Laurium, right outside of Calumet, Michigan. So he built his wife a 42-room mansion. And this is it over here. Okay, honey, you can open your eyes now. And this mansion still exists. My wife and I stayed in the Bisbee room at the Hoatzin Mansion. We're the only people on Hoatzin Avenue to have stayed in the Hoatzin Mansion to date. And it was the most opulent mansion in Laurium, which is full of mansions built by people who earned a lot of money off of Calumet and Hecla and Calumet and Arizona copper mining. And Duluth also had its share of businessmen who made a lot of money off their CNA profits. This is Chester Congdon. Congdon Avenue in Warren is named after him. He was an attorney in Duluth who worked for the iron mining companies in northern Minnesota, the Mesaba Range, central Minnesota. And he invested in iron mining and became wealthy. And when the opportunity rose, he invested in Bisbee copper in the Calumet in Arizona and went from being rich to filthy rich. And that's his little bungalow on the shores of Lake Michigan. That's Glen Sheen. Glen Sheen was a 39-room mansion. It had all kinds of outbuildings. It is incredibly beautiful mansion. I looked for vulgarity in that mansion when we took the tour and could find none. Tasteful, understated, absolutely gorgeous. And when he died in 1916, he was reputed to be the wealthiest man in Minnesota from his money invested in the iron mines of Minnesota and the copper mines of Bisbee. And we'll hear about this mansion and the Hoatzin Mansion later on. Another investor in Duluth who made a ton of money off of Bisbee copper was Charles d'Outremont. And when you see a small d in front of a French name, that means aristocracy. The d'Outremont family came to the United States during the terrorist years of the French Revolution. As an aristocrat, his great-great-grandfather was target of the revolutionaries. So the family moved to the United States and moved across the United States from the East Coast. And by the 1880s, Charles d'Outremont was living as a lawyer in Duluth, Minnesota. He became the St. Louis County attorney, which St. Louis County is the county where Duluth is located, and in 1882, mayor of Duluth. So this man was wealthy. And this story is all about Bisbee copper, the story of the d'Outremont family and how they came to the United States and how they got filthy, how Mr. d'Outremont got filthy, filthy rich. And of course, d'Outremont Avenue in Warren is named for Charles B. d'Outremont. So all of these mines that the Calumet in Arizona located, and there's just a few of them on here. There's the coal mine. The Briggs mine was over here. The Campbell shaft is here. The Irish Mag. There were a lot of other mines in this area too. Became known as the Bonanza Circle. Just an incredible, lucrative copper producing set of mines owned by the Calumet in Arizona. So you can see that the CNA was located mostly around Lowell, which would be right around here. And this light green area is Phelps Dodge properties. This is the Shattuck, Arizona property, the Den, Arizona property. So by the the 1906, 1907, the CNA was a very, very major player in the Warren Mining District and was producing a fairly large portion of copper that came out of it. Now, you'd think that PD would be resentful of the CNA coming in, snatching the Irish Mag and the junction out from underneath their noses. And in other mining camps in the West, this would have produced some very, very angry repercussions. Butte, Montana had three major companies owned by August Heinze, Marcus Daly, and William Clark. And those three companies fought like cats and dogs. Their employees fought underneath the surface when the mines were connected to each other. Just a very, very ugly situation in Butte, Montana. But in Bisbee, the mining companies operated as a cartel rather than as bitter competitors, which was, um, I think they looked at what was going on in Butte and decided we don't want to go in that direction. There's plenty here for everybody. So these companies worked together. They set common wages. The professional elements of the company, the mining engineers, the business people in the organizations, socialized together at the country club. CNA copper rode down to Douglas on Phelps Dodge owned railroad and then to the refineries in El Paso. Everybody got along really well. So, um, what is most impressive about the CNA is that it was able to come in as an outside company and make a lot of money for its investors and not antagonize the Copper Queen Consolidated Mining Company, which was the major component of Phelps Dodge, a cartel. In 1910, Lewis Powell, and Powell Street in Warren is named after him, replaced Sam Parnell, and he was tasked with developing a number of projects in the Warren Mining District. One of them was to develop a new community. The other was to develop a transportation system. So they are going to start terraforming the area close to where their mines are located. And Bisbee, old Bisbee at that time, was very crowded, dirty, smelly. It was also full of those immigrants, which uh, were not welcome with open arms in the better neighborhoods of Old Bisbee, Quality Hill, and other areas that were west of the downtown part of Bisbee. So there was a plan developed by the Calumet in Arizona and supported by Phelps Dodge and the other mining companies that were here to build a new suburb. And that was one of Lewis Powell's jobs. He was a civil engineer as well as a mining engineer. So he had the tools necessary to not just oversee the mining company, part of the operation, but also as a development company to develop a planned community. So long before Del Webb Sun City, up west of Phoenix, the first planned community in Arizona was Warren Town Site. So Lewis Powell came in 1906 and started getting things ready to develop the Warren Town Site. And of course, that's the mansion that was constructed for the Calumet and Arizona superintendents. That's right nearby Loma Linda, the mansion for Phelps Dodge. So at the very northern end of Warren is where the superintendents lived. I'm pretty sure this is a kit house and not developed by a specific architect that would build a one-time only mansion that everybody would look at as a architectural feat like Henry Trost did for Loma Linda. Regardless, it is a gorgeous, gorgeous house. And the first man to live in it wasn't John Greenway, it was Lewis Powell. And the profits that CNA developed, and again, how much money were the mining companies make? They could buy their own railroad, as the Phelps Dodge companies did, and they could also build their own communities, as the Calumet and Arizona Mining Company did. So their profits financed the Warren Town Site. And you can see the Warren Development Company building right there, which later became the Warren Realty Building, where the owners of the Copper Pig live now. And this was the breaking ground on the new Calumet, Arizona general offices for Warren. And this is the building over here on the right that was built, completed March 1909. And as we know, in October 2017, it burned down, but it has risen from the ashes. This part of the building was saved during the fire, this molded concrete building. And the new building that was constructed on the same site bears a startling resemblance to the old CNA General Office building. So the Warren Town Site is being planned out. It was planned out to the southwest of Lowell in a relatively open area, a basin surrounded by lower hills than Old Bisbee. where it was possible to terraform and build a new town site. And these two were the two fellows that were involved in doing that. Warren Manning, who was a major proponent of the City Beautiful movement in the United States at that time, with the purpose of transforming ugly American cities, boring American cities, into places of beauty. And specifically working on Bisbee also was Huger Elliott. So they're between them, they were going to plan the Warren Town site and turn it into a city beautiful. And Cleveland Van Dyke, another Duluth person, a mining engineer and a civil engineer, was tasked with actually developing the town site itself. So laying out the streets, putting in the infrastructure, that was his job. So water lines, electrical lines, sewer lines, and the streets was his job. And he did this in an office in Duluth, Minnesota. And after Cleve Van Dyke left Bisbee, after he did his thing here, he went to Globe and developed the Miami town site. He also developed a copper company, and there's the prospectus for his copper company right over there on the right, and that's him in the middle. And of course, Van Dyke Street is named after him in Warren. And who do you name the new town site after? Well, probably a lot of possibilities, but how about the town drunk? Now, this is George Warren, and if you're familiar with Bisbee, you know the story, but let's assume that there are people here that aren't familiar. So George Warren was one of the earliest prospectors to come into the Mule Mountains after the Chiricahua Apaches were deported in 1876 to San Carlos. He was not the first person to discover copper ore in the Mule Mountains. That was the members of the cavalry patrol that came in. So Tony Rucker and his scout Jack Dunn. But he was sent to Tucson to file the claims by Tony Rucker, and instead of filing claims for Lieutenant Rucker and Jack Dunn, he filed claims for himself. And if you're the first person to file claims, then you get the mining district named after you, evidently. So it became Mule Mountains in the part of the mules where Bisbee is and where the mines were developed and operated, became the Warren Mining District. And according to legend, he lost his share of the Copper Queen mine in a race in Charleston in July 1879 when he tried to outrun a horse. Now, not only did he get the Warren Mining District named after him and the neighborhood of Warren and Warren Ballpark, but he also, as a result of this photo that was taken by C.S. Fly, had his likeness put on the Great Seal of the state of Arizona. So yes, Bisbee's biggest drunk, no mean accomplishment in a mining camp, is on the Great Seal of the state of Arizona. Go figure. I think DTOT Deuce does not stand for God and Riches. It stands for belly up to the bar, boys. These are two more folks that were involved in developing the Warren Town site. This is Henry Hovland. He was a personal assistant to the governor of Minnesota and a member of the Minnesota Board of Regents. And he's from Duluth. He came out here and helped develop the Warren Company. And he and Hoval Smith over here, who became a candidate for U.S. Senator during the first senatorial elections in 1912, these two men developed the Warren Town site in terms of turning it into lots and selling those lots off. So Hoval, Smith didn't get anything named after him. There's no Smith Street, but there is, of course, we know Hovland Street in Warren. And this was the original Warren Town site. It was going to be all mission revival Spanish colonial style architecture. And it was going to be this grandiose project that was going to have lots and lots of traffic circles, broad vistas, and lots of public buildings. And when the CNA company officials looked at this, the plan that was developed, they said, this is a little bit more grandiose than what we intended. And they axed the idea of having a universal form. Oh, this is an aqueduct over here too. So this is going to be like Roman architecture, and it's going to be incredibly beautiful. And it was just way, way grandiose. So it was toned down. This was the vista. This concept of the central linear park continued to survive. This plaza on this end that was surrounded by public buildings and all kinds of shops and things in beautiful mission revival architecture was scrapped, and this became Warren Ballpark. And the mansions, of course, were up here. And so the City of Beautiful started to take place or take shape, and this was the original town site plat. And this is the finished model right here. And it is a lovely neighborhood. It is Mayberry in the Mill Mountains. It was the first part of Bisbee where every home had electrical power connected to it, had toilets that flushed because it had sewers, and had water lines. And if you live here and you look at your deed, it says that you can't have places that sell retail alcohol, houses of prostitution, or yards for tanning hides. And it was looked at as the place and marketed as the place where you can raise your kids. And it'll be peace and harmony and everybody gets along. And it really is that kind of a neighborhood today, for the most part. And the Warren Company also developed other infrastructure along with the Bisbee Improvement Company. And one of the things they did was develop the Warren Bisbee Street Railway, which transformed transportation. It made it suddenly possible before automobiles to get from Warren to Bisbee in a few minutes for a dime. And that made it possible for people to live in one part of the community and work in another. So the street railway was transformative. It reached all the way down to the country club about a mile south of Warren on Airport Road today, and all the way up to Upper Tombstone Canyon, and ran every few minutes all day, except for 3 hours in the very early hours of the day. And this is, of course, the streetcar barn for the Warren Bisbee Street Railway. It still exists, and it's one of the few remaining vestiges left of the Warren Bisbee Street Railway. This is March 1908 when the streetcar first ran, and there was a huge celebration in downtown Old Bisbee. And there's a really good photo of the streetcar running downtown. There's the PD Merc in the background on Main Street. And other infrastructure that the Calumet, Arizona developed was its own company hospital. Of course, the Copper Queen had their company hospital, and now the CNA had their own too, first in Lowell, and then in March 1918, they built a state-of-the-art hospital, best x-ray equipment, brand new emergency rooms, everything is state-of-the-art. That building, of course, was shut down as a hospital in Bakerville once that the companies merged in 1931 and became apartments, but it's still there, and we hope that it becomes affordable housing in the very near future. It is a gorgeous building. It's made entirely of concrete. It is as fireproof as a hospital could be made. And they developed the Warren Ballpark also, and this is it, about 1910. And you can see Warren's already developed pretty much. And there's the Warren Company Realty offices right there. There's what is now City Hall, the CNA general offices, Black Knob, and Arizona Street. And Linear Park. And all this was modeled after Washington, D.C. The topography may be different, but if you look at a plat map, you'll see some striking similarities between this and D.C. And these are some of the other streets that are connected with the CNA and some of the people that they're named for. I got one of them renamed. Paul Street was somebody along the way from the city probably dropped off one of the L's thinking it was a misspelling, and we got it corrected again not too long ago. 1910, John Greenway came in from Minnesota He'd been up in the Iron Range and working up there. This was TR, Teddy Roosevelt's BFF. He went up the hill with Teddy Roosevelt as an officer with the Rough Riders in Cuba in July 1898. So he was fast friends with the President of the United States. Ivy League educated, would have been an All American athlete, brilliant man, extremely good mining engineer, and also just very imaginative, willing to try new things, take risks. And he did, his job was not just to develop the mines in Bisbee, but to cast his eyes about and find other properties in Arizona and see what they could do to increase the CNA's operations. So they operated in, or invested in, and operated in other mining camps. This is Cortland, and it opened up in about 1909. And the Calumet in Arizona operated mines in that area in conjunction with the Great Western Mining Company. Cortland didn't pan out as a mining camp like Bisbee did, and it shut down in the early 1920s. So this was not one of the CNA's most successful operations. But they also did the same thing in Jerome. They had small operations in Superior, and they also invested in the 85 mine just south of um, Lordsburg, New Mexico. And so the CNA operated in both states, and they had extensive operations in a lot of places. But the place that John Greenway invested in that turned out to be the most lucrative was Ajo. And in 1910, as soon as he came into the picture, another mining engineer that worked for the CNA named Ira Jorlman told him about the potential of the Cornelia mine, the new Cornelia mine it had morphed into, in far off Ajo. And all the efforts made to develop that low grade ore body had not turned out successfully. Greenway decided this is going to be my project. I'm going to make this work. So he tapped Henry Tobelman, who was a mining chemist for the CNA in Douglas, to develop a pilot plant to leach the copper out of the milled copper ore that had been turned into powder, leach it out, and produce copper that way. So this is the leaching plant. And this is Ajo at its very, very infancy stage. This is 1914. People living in tents in Ajo in the summertime. God help them. And this is the leaching plant that was developed around 1917 in Ajo. And it turned out to be a fabulously successful investment. Over time, this turned into the CNA's most productive property. And the Ajo mines worked from 1917 until 1983. And according to rumor, there's still copper ore out there. So this was strip mining, open pit, using steam shovels. And these are the anodes that are being the copper sheets that were developed through the leaching process in the plant in Ajo. Lots and lots of copper. But just like the Warren Mining District, the CNA decided they wanted to turn this into a beautiful planned community. So they built, and if you go to Ajo, there are some gorgeous, gorgeous public buildings. The plaza is spectacular. It still is today. It's beautiful. And this is the early stage. They've only developed one side of it, but flagpole is identical to the one on the Vista and over by the Greenway Mansion. But this plaza was completed with 3 sides, and it is absolutely beautiful. Shops, theaters, and Greenway said, we don't want a company store in the CNA. We're going to develop a co-op. This was the first food co-op owned and operated by a mining company in the state of Arizona. And of course, it became a PD Mercantile in 1931, but it was operated as the first food co-op. And we know that the CNA took an active participation in the Bisbee deportation. John Greenway was one of the planners, along with Walter Douglas and Lemuel Shattuck and other mining owners and operators and senior officials. Almost all of the CNA senior officials, mining company senior employees were involved in the operation, as were many of their laborers and common workers. And John Greenway was indicted both on the federal level and on the county level for kidnapping, denying civil rights. Of course, nobody that was involved in the deportation ended up uh, being convicted of any kind of a crime. The only person killed that day on the side of the vigilantes was Orson McCrae, who was a shift boss for the CNA. And he was killed trying to apprehend James Brew in Upper Lowell. Both men are buried in Evergreen Cemetery. The last mine to be developed by the CNA, big mine in the Warren Mining District, was the Campbell Shaft. And they started doing exploration work, and it's right out on the outskirts of Bakerville, just past the traffic circle going into Bakerville and Bisbee Road. And it became a major copper producer. So it operated from 1917 until 1975. That's a long lifespan for an operating underground mine. And it was the last mine to shut down in the Warren Mining District in 1975. On the left is a well-known figure and thanks for agreeing to pose there, Joe. Joe Saba, retired Roman Catholic priest and Bisbee native, and here he is in the operating the hoist controls for the Campbell Shaft. Now, copper mining is boom and bust. So there was a boom in 1901. There was a bust in 1907 when there was an economic downturn. There was a boom from 1909 until 1914 when the war started. And then there was a bust for a while when there was a naval blockade of Germany. And then there was a boom when all the Allied countries, Britain and France and Italy, started buying vast amounts of copper. So during World War I, copper prices increased threefold. After the war, demand for copper plummeted, and there were large stockpiles. So there was a bust. By the mid 1920s, there was a boom again as the demand for copper rose with the development of commercial radio and more automobiles being built, and refrigerators, and all the other appliances that required copper to conduct electricity. But every good thing comes to an end. So the boom of the mid 1920s, the roaring 20s, ended, of course, in October 29 with the stock market crash and the start of the Great Depression. And when that happened, every copper mine in Arizona either shut down or drastically reduced its copper production. So, for all intents and purposes, the copper industry was out of business in Arizona in 1929. Phelps Dodge had always been conservative with its money. It had accumulated large amounts of capital, but its mines were aging, so it was copper poor and cash rich. The CNA, on the other hand, with its acquisition of the New Cornelia mine, and it's still producing newer mines in the Warren Mining District around Lowell, was copper rich and cash poor. It intended to put its profits into infrastructure improvements and also into dividends. Now, something else that you need to take into consideration is the original members of the board of directors and the operating officers of the Calumet in Arizona, as time went on, were replaced by other members of their board of directors, some of whom were pretty friendly towards Phelps Dodge and were no longer really part of the Calumet and Duluth group of directors and officers who had been in on the original development of the company. So in the early 1930s, an effort was made by Phelps Dodge to absorb the Calumet in Arizona. That effort was rejected. Phelps Dodge started a proxy battle where they accumulated enough stock to be able to actively take over control of the CNA. They decided once we get the CNA acquisition done, we're going to move the headquarters out of Duluth or out of Calumet, Michigan to New York City, which is where Phelps Dodge headquarters was. And Gordon Campbell, by that time, remember Gordon Campbell was the general counsel and secretary would come out to make sure that the Irish mag was legal. He'd become president of the CNA in 1923. 1931, he fought tooth and nail, but when he recognized that they didn't have the horsepower to resist the Phelps Dodge takeover, he quit, and the CNA was acquired by Phelps Dodge. The company headquarters was moved first to New York, and then the company was just absorbed by Phelps Dodge. Phelps Dodge stock was traded in very favorable quantities for CNA stock, and the CNA went out of existence. Its imprint remains strong because the Warren neighborhood is definitely a very important part of Bisbee, and a lot of the landmarks that were created by the CNA as far as physical infrastructure are still there. We now have a historic district in Warren after 3 attempts, and there's a strong community identity. Also, Ajo is enjoying a renaissance as well. So there's a great amount of what CNA did in the early part of the 20th century to develop mining operations and infrastructure in Arizona still exists today. And here's an interesting part of the story. Remember, I told you that we're going to take a look at those 2 mansions, the Hotzen Mansion and the Congdon Mansion in Calumet or Laurium and in Duluth. Both of them were the scenes of multiple homicides in the 1970s. So in 1977, Elizabeth Congdon, who was the last daughter of Chester Congdon, and her nurse, the only people that were living in that mansion at the time, were murdered. And it is believed that they were murdered by her adopted daughter, Marjorie Congdon's husband. Marjorie Congdon was a certified, bona fide, diagnosed sociopath at the Menninger Institute. And she was implicated in 5 homicides, never convicted for any of those, but she was a diagnosed sociopath. I believe she's still alive in Tucson. She was finally arrested for trying to commit an arson in Ajo and served time in prison in Perryville in West Phoenix area. And if you go to the Glensheen Mansion in Duluth, at the very end of the tour, they mention the homicides. They don't play it up. They play up the mansion itself. But this was the scene of a multiple homicide. There are books that have been written about this. And it shook Duluth to the core. In 1979, during the worst winter that the Upper Peninsula had seen, and when you're talking about the worst winter, you're talking about Antarctica type weather. By this time, the Hotzen Mansion had passed out of the Hotzen hands and been purchased and turned into a funeral home. And Maynard Hurlbut was the funeral director who lived in the mansion. And during this horrible, horrible winter, bleak, dark, cold winter, he decided to take his life. But first, he killed his wife, he killed his grandson, he laid out the clothes for all of them, wrote detailed instructions on how to conduct the funerals, and then killed himself. So this was the site of a triple homicide. The Glensheen Mansion was the site of a double homicide. And when we were up at the Hotzen Mansion in Laurium, there were Goths staying there that apparently had come up because they were intrigued by the idea of a multiple murder taking place there. So it's a bizarre coincidence that both of these mansions that were built with Bisbee copper money, at least in part, the Glensheen Mansion in Duluth, and almost entirely with Bisbee money in Laurium, Upper Peninsula, Michigan, were the scenes of multiple homicides. The legacy in Bisbee of the Calumet in Arizona lives on. The Campbell Shaft, CNA production. The Greenway Mansion, owned by Gretchen Bonadus, successful bed and breakfast, still operating today. So this is the story of the CNA. Very successful mining company that disappeared into history when it was absorbed by Phelps Dodge, but there's still much of it around to see. I hope you enjoyed the story.
Well, thank you so much, Mike. One question is, how long did John Greenway live in Bisbee?
He lived in Bisbee until he went into the Army. And Greenway, remember, he was with the Rough Riders in 1898, and he went into the Army as an engineer during the Great War in 1917, and then transferred to the infantry, served in combat again. And when he came back, he went to Ajo. He lived in Ajo, and he was buried in Ajo until very recently when his son, John Greenway, died. Family disinterred the body and moved it back east, which is, I'm sure John Greenway didn't want that. He was beloved in Ajo. So he wasn't in Ajo for a real long period of time, but he was there long enough to really put his imprint on Bisbee and also to create an incredibly successful mining operation in Ajo.
Another question I think that we all want to know more about is Elizabeth would like to hear more stories about how Warren earned the reputation as the town's biggest drunk.
Well, oh, his life story is pretty murky. A lot of it's anecdotal, but um, when people were talking about him, people that had known him back in the late 1870s and early 1880s, he had a reputation for being a very hard drinker. He'd gone down to Mexico and got himself sold into debt peonage down there. And after he returned to Arizona, he was rescued by benefactors from Bisbee. He was given odd jobs around the town, and he was just known as being a very hard drinker. And of course, he was disinterred from a pauper's grave and buried under a large concrete uh, monument painted white close to the entrance of Evergreen Cemetery. It's my belief that if George had his own choice in the matter, he would rather have been buried under the floor at St. Elmo, face up, so that anything spilled on the floor would go into his mouth. But it always had the reputation. A lot of it's anecdotal, but it seems that it was pretty probably well deserved.
And Christine asked, the Greenway House is known as a kit house. Are there
Yes.
many kit houses in Bisbee?
There's a number of them. As a matter of fact, right across the street from us in Hoatzin, on Hoatzin Avenue, where the Hartmans live, Melissa and her husband, who just passed away, Greg, that's a Sears kit house. So there are kit houses. They're not as common as they were in other parts of the United States. There's a neighborhood in Pontiac, Illinois. The entire neighborhood is Sears kit houses. Well made, well constructed houses. All the materials came in on rail cars, instructions included for plumbers, electricians, and everybody else that was involved in the process. That was a kit house, I do believe, and it is a beautiful, beautiful building. They went from modest bungalows to mansions. And there were several companies, not just Sears, that did it. There were also other companies that produced kit houses at the time as well.
And
They were, oh, I was just going to say they were site built though.
Jeff asks, do you foresee any attempts to extract more copper from the mountains of the tailings in Bisbee, like what's happening with the stamp sands and Keweenaw?
Yeah, I think you're going to have to ask Freeport. And I'm not sure they're going to be forthcoming about that. Mining companies are fairly closed mouthed about their future business plans. There is a large ore body, the Cochise project, on the north side of Highway 80, and there were a lot of tests done. I would not be surprised sometime in the future if that body was developed. There's a great need for copper, and the more electronics that we have, the more technology that we have, the greater the need for, unless there's some kind of technological miracle, the greater the need for copper will exist. So it wouldn't surprise me. Wouldn't surprise me if we started seeing a lot of active mining in the Keweenaw again too, because copper, as technology develops and allows the extraction of lower and lower grade bodies of copper ore, and the demand rises for copper to uh, operate electronics and data centers and all the other things that we're looking at today, the chances are greater that we'll see more copper extraction in Arizona and the Keweenaw.
And what was the CNA production compared to that of other companies like the Copper Queen?
Well, good question. And it was on the pie graph. I didn't elaborate on it, but Phelps Dodge produced slightly over 50% of all the copper that was produced in Bisbee during the peak years. The CNA produced about 37, 38%. The third largest company was Shattuck, Arizona. Lem Shattuck owned and operated, and then the Den Arizona Copper Company. Interestingly enough, both the Shattuck, Arizona and the Den Arizona Copper Companies, which were um, also major players, but not nearly as big as PD and CNA, they were financed largely from investors in Superior, Wisconsin, right across the St. Louis River from Duluth, Minnesota. So CNA produced over a third, almost 40%. PD was the largest, and the other copper companies were made up the rest. But CNA was a major producer.
Well, Mike, thank you so much for once again sharing your time and knowledge with our audience. We have many thank yous also to you in the Q&A. I truly appreciate you spending another Saturday with us.
And I truly appreciate having the opportunity to spend a Saturday with you, dear lady, and all the folks out here who took the time to hear this.
Oh, thank you so much. I'd also like to thank our audience for joining us today, and I hope to see you again online September 19th when Arizona State Mine Inspector Les Presmick examines the mines of the Clifton Morenci Mining District. Take care, everyone. Until then, bye.